from the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. This is our first program, the inaugural program, our debut on RVTV Voices. Ramping Up Your English is for English language learners from all language backgrounds who have already begun the process of learning English as their second language. It's a program for people of all ages. If you're seeking greater English proficiency, this program is designed to help you reach that goal. My name is John Letts, and I've worked with children and adults in Southern Oregon schools. My experience has taught me that there are many approaches to learning a language. The most effective approach, in my view, is a content-based approach. That's what I offer you on the long, hard road to English proficiency. You may wonder why I'm dressed more as a blue-collar worker than a teacher. That has to do with the theme of our first unit of study, which I'll explain today. I'll also explain why my face is so dirty. Learning a new language has many challenges. I know these firsthand from my experience learning Spanish. There's often frustration, confusion, uncertainty, and the need to take risks. There are mistakes, at times embarrassment, and work. When we hear policymakers talk about education these days, we often hear the word rigor. It's used to measure the effectiveness of instructional goals for students. I feel that's wrong. Sure, there's a degree of rigor in any worthy undertaking, but the job of the teacher is to find ways through that rigor to make the learning less rigorous for the student, not more. The approach I take in Ramping Up Your English is to help you reach your goal of English proficiency with as little stress as possible and to appeal to a wide range of learning styles using the wonderful technology of television and online video. Ramping Up Your English is a fun, low-stress, and interesting way to learn English as your second language. So this program uses a content-based approach. The theme I've chosen for our first unit of study is Trains and Railroads. It's not a particularly academic theme, but there's all kinds of academic content embedded in the theme. Trains and railroads tap into experiences held by a great number of people, yet I hope you'll also enjoy learning more about the topic. It's a topic that interests people in a wide range of ages and cultural backgrounds. So I've attempted to dress like a train engineer. Here's my engineer's hat right here, and having all that coal fed into the locomotive, it's left my face smeared in soot. You'll see and hear a lot about trains and railroads during our first unit. That will provide the context so you'll be able to understand and build on the English you encounter in this program. So let's jump right into this theme. Here's a brief video clip that introduces our theme. Your English lesson begins now. The assignment is simple. Just watch the video clip and see how much you understand. That's where we'll pick up the lesson after the clip. Across America, trains carry people and freight from one place to another. When it comes to passenger trains, it's often more about the journey, less about the destination. Trains can take you to the edge of the continent, which in America means the edge of the ocean. It can transport people to the towering mountains in our country,
Canyons and other natural beauty are yours as a passenger, without the responsibility of having to drive. Yes, trains can give us scenery unavailable by other means, but trains themselves provide a fascination for many. Passengers wait to board a train on a platform. A new team of engineers get aboard to move the train through 8 hours and hundreds of miles, carrying passengers safely across the land. I'm John Letts, your host on this train trip. There are trains that move underground, subway trains, like this one in the city of Prague. Trains called ice that speed passengers between major cities in Europe. New trains like this one, carrying passengers back and forth from the Czech Republic. Trains in Europe can show you castles along the Rhine River and the Alps in Switzerland. These are Swiss trains, and yes, they run on time. In Europe, most cities and towns are connected by rail. Getting to almost any destination is easy on the train. Finding your train at the station may be a bit of a challenge until you learn how to read one of these. You may never find yourself operating a locomotive or even being a train passenger, but you can still enjoy seeing and hearing and learning about trains. And who knows, someday you just might be welcomed aboard a train. More on trains coming up on Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
So how is that short video clip going to help you improve your English? Well, we always want to start with what you know. That's the foundation for learning more. So, start with this. What did you see in the video clip? Don't worry about anything else right now. Just focus on what you saw. Can you relate what you saw in English, or do you need to rely on your native language? Maybe a mixture of the two? That's okay. You'll find that your native language is the best tool you have now to learn a second language. Here's another tool that will help you boost your English into a higher orbit, a notebook dedicated to this service. If you don't have one of these, any piece of paper will do for today, but make sure you get a notebook for the next episode. Here are a few simple sentences in English relating to what I saw in the video. I saw people, I saw white smoke, I saw big engines, I saw the ocean, I saw tracks. My list can get you started, but be sure to add to the list. Use your home language if you need to, especially for objects in the video that you can name but just don't know the English word. Don't try to name everything in the video. 10 to 12 sentences should be plenty. You also can expand the list to what you heard. If you want to see the video clip again, go to letscreate.org where you can repeat it. Finishing this list is all the homework you need to do for this segment, if you choose to do homework. You'll find more resources on our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download the program and others by going to archive.org/details/RogueTV. Come aboard to ramp up your English. You're watching episode 1. This ends segment 1. We'll be back with segment 2 right after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. When I was learning early intermediate Spanish, I found that children's books were a great tool for becoming more proficient. Now, if you're an adult, don't be embarrassed to take advantage of this great resource. You'll learn more about the instructional theme, and the plentiful illustrations will give you great context to better understand what you're reading. One such book is Trains, written and illustrated by Gail Gibbons. There are many books entitled Trains, but the one by Gail Gibbons features all the basics of trains. Her illustrations are works of art, and the text is easy to follow. Gail Gibbons has written many books that help children learn. Let your inner child play with this one, and you'll take another step toward English proficiency without even knowing it. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. This is episode 1, segment 2. If you missed our first segment, you can find it at letscreate.org. When improving second language skills, it's helpful to have a theme that provides a context for the English you'll hear and learn during your journey to English proficiency. We're still at the beginning of our thematic unit, Trains and Railroads. While it's normal to be eager to study the structure and expand your vocabulary, it pays to become firmly rooted in the theme first. We'll roll out lots of lessons and guide you through the language structures of English. However, today we're taking the time to solidly establish our theme. To those ends, we're going to watch another introductory video clip about trains and railroads. Your assignment this time is to see how many English words you recognize in the clip's narration. You can do that formally by keeping a tally, or just note about what % of the narration you understand. Feel free to use the visual clues. That's why they're there.
You have probably heard trains, even seen them. Trains were a revolution in transportation, the cutting edge of technology in their time. A train's whistle or the clickety-clack of the wheels on the rails can take us back in time. But trains continue to be an important part of our lives today, and they're a source of fascination and even obsession to some. Trains can also take us to places of unimaginable beauty. Freight trains move things, or cargo, across the country, using way less energy per pound than trucks. This freight train is headed east along the Columbia River. In the past, there were hundreds of railroad companies in the United States. Now there are only a few. Even the giant Southern Pacific is merged with Union Pacific. Passenger rail service switched from hundreds of private companies to Amtrak, now the only provider of passenger rail service to most parts of the United States. After more than 40 years of service, Amtrak continues to provide memorable service to rail passengers, quite an accomplishment since its inception in 1972. Major cities and small towns depend on Amtrak for the freedom to travel. Tourist trains allow people to experience rail travel as it was in the past, also called excursion trains. These railroads travel on old railroad lines that are no longer part of the main rail network. Many of them use historic steam engines.
And what's the name of this train?
The skunk train, because it's stinky.
Some will take you to wild places like Alaska. Some passenger trains combine the excursion experience with regular scheduled transportation between one place and another. Amtrak times its routes so that passengers get to see the most beautiful scenery during the daylight hours. This train is called the California Zephyr, traveling along the Colorado River in the Rocky Mountains. Some railroads tried very hard to keep passenger rail service when airplanes and interstate highways cut into their passenger base. The Rio Grande Railroad tried to operate this section of the California Zephyr route even after Amtrak was born, but they had to give it up due to the expense. Now the number of people riding the California Zephyr, now operated by Amtrak, is increasing every year. Each passenger train is under the responsibility of a conductor, seen here helping children detrain at a station. A car where passengers are not welcome is the baggage car. This is where checked baggage is carried. On passenger trains, sleeping cars have bedrooms that leave only a tiny hall for people to pass. Some trains pull special cars and have special events, like wine tasting on the Coast Starlight. The dining car is a tasty luxury and can seem like a necessity on long-distance trains. The food here is very tasty. The observation car offers wraparound windows for enjoying mountainous scenery. Speaking of mountainous scenery, you get to see tunnels and snow sheds on some trains. There are softer, gentler views as well.
California artichokes. Fry them up.
Some trains go right along the ocean, like the Coast Starlight in California. There are platforms where passengers go from long-distance trains to local and regional transportation. Major cities have union stations, built many years ago by competing railroads. In smaller towns, there are stations just for Amtrak. Passengers get the comfort of waiting inside and get services like being able to buy tickets. Getting on a train is called boarding. Getting off is called deboarding or detraining. When a train leaves the station, that's called pulling out. Coming into a station is called pulling in. There's a lot to learn about trains, but it's fun to learn. Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. So how did you do? How much of the narration did you understand? Whatever amount, you've taken the first steps in assessing your own proficiency. Your only assignment now is to write down something to represent how much of the clip you understood. Also put the date. We'll compare that with a similar clip later in the unit. This completes segment 2 of episode 1 of Ramping Up Your English, an educational support program for intermediate English language learners who want to improve their language proficiency. If that's you, you're in the right place. I'll return right after this. This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If you're enjoying our theme of trains and railroads, you might want to check out a catalog from Historic Rail. Their free catalog is aimed mostly at model railroad enthusiasts, but I found some treasures in here worth spending a few dollars on. Sometimes I don't order anything, but I still enjoy the pictures of trains from railroads that no longer exist. This cover features the Burlington Northern, the railroad that pulled the California Zephyr from Chicago to Denver. You can order a model engine or artwork of Burlington Northern, this passenger train pulling into the station. Some pages are devoted to a single railroad, like the Great Northern, whose Empire Builder route is now operated by Amtrak, or the Santa Fe, with its distinctive war bonnet that's designed on its locomotive. Passengers on Amtrak Southwest Chief are retracing the route of the Chief, a famous route operated in the past by Santa Fe railroads. Model railroading is a hobby that's too expensive for me, but I've enjoyed videos, books, and t-shirts that I've ordered over the years. Visitors can visit their website. A book review on a catalog? Why not? I'm John Letts. And welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. This is Episode 1, Segment 3. We're taking the time to become familiar with the topic of our first unit, which is trains and railroads. Any topic will have its own vocabulary, and this one's no different. As you watch this video clip, listen for words that have to do with trains and railroads. When the clip is over, we'll make a list.
After over 150 years, trains continue to move people and freight across the United States. We're using the topic of trains and railroads to elevate our level of English. This Amtrak train is pulling out of the Lafayette station. As it picks up speed, we hope to speed up your mastery of English through a content-based approach. We look at commuter trains and even trains driven by remote control. This coal train passes through Colorado. A great amount of coal is moved by train. In West Coast ports, huge equipment like this lifts freight containers off ships and sets them on train cars, an example of freight shipping. This freight train is pulling hopper cars. Those freight containers are carried great distances east. Here they catch up with us at El Paso, Texas. El Paso is also a major stop for Amtrak's Sunset Limited train. Many people work to keep passenger trains moving, including conductors. Engineers drive the train. Some sleeping car passengers have lavatories in their rooms.
Sound effects and all.
Amtrak takes passengers where private railroads used to. Amtrak trains even pull private cars from former railroads.
How we doing, everybody?
Hey, this is our friendly car attendant.
Here's a crossing signal. The Sunset Limited takes passengers over the highest railroad bridge in the United States, crossing the Pecos River in Texas. Speaking of bridges, here's a highway bridge over the Calcasieu River in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And here's Houston, Texas. This is a steam engine hooking up with passenger cars on an excursion railroad. Open cars like these help passengers get a great view.
Express.
Stay here and do this. I'm going to go through about the...
Many other countries have passenger trains. These electric trains serve passengers in Germany.
We're in Switzerland.
Railroads are a very important way of getting around in the state of Alaska.
You'd rather sit for the back of our group. Is this okay?
Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. As I said at the beginning of this episode, I learned Spanish as a second language. That gave me some insight into the struggle of learning a second language and continually pushing toward greater language proficiency. When I was at intermediate level of Spanish, I wouldn't have known what all these words mean in the video clip, but I would have been pretty sure about some of them. Let's look at some of the words mentioned in the video clip. At this point, I'm only interested in the words that have to do with trains and railroads, words that identify things or people. These would be nouns. So here are some words that I jotted down from the video. I heard them a number of times, so I think they must be important. Most of the English learners I work with are Spanish speakers, so I'm using Spanish as an example of a home language. The word train sounds like the Spanish word tren, and there are trenes throughout the video. I have high certainty that train and tren mean the same thing. Words that are similar and mean the same thing are called cognates. There are likely to be cognates in a number of languages for the word train. I also hear the word railroad a lot. No cognate comes to mind, but the part of the word road I happen to know in English, so this word must have to do with the surface on which the train travels. The Spanish word for freight is unfamiliar unless they use the word carga, which is close to the word cargo. Freight sounds a little like fright, but I don't have to consider this what that is. So I'd say this is an unknown word. That's what I'll consider it. Passenger for Spanish speaker is a cognate for pasajero, an easy cognate I would have known as an intermediate Spanish speaker. Do you see how the content provided by our unit can help identify meanings of some words? I got 3 out of the 4 words with some certainty. As English language learners, you probably already go through this process, but slowing it down like this can bring a greater level of certainty and awareness. What about the unknown word freight? You could let it slide until you hear it used a number of times in context. You could also look it up in the dictionary. I recommend this children's dictionary for the simplicity of definitions. I do have to warn you about dictionaries for second language learners. The definitions are sometimes harder to understand than the word itself. Using context is always a good step. In this case, the dictionary says goods or cargo carried by trains, ships, planes, trucks, etc. As long as you know what the words good, cargo, and carried is, this would work for you. Write this list down to add to the previous list. Now, if you can't get it down fast enough, you'll find it on my website. Go to letscreate.org. This is your homework if you decide to do it. Homework assignments help to elevate your English proficiency level faster, but you can still improve your English without doing these assignments. So those are your 2 homework assignments today, listing the sights and sounds of the video clip in segment 1 and finding the meaning of these words in segment 3. Remember, you can watch or download today's program by going to archive.org/details/roguetv and look for Ramping Up Your English. You can also go to letscreate.org and follow the links. This is episode 1, and we're now closing segment 3. If today's program seems too easy, please remember we're just getting the foundation for our unit today. If it seems too hard, feel free to repeat the program at the websites I've just mentioned. This concludes our debut episode of Ramping Up Your English. Join us next time for episode 2 on RVTV Voices. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roguetv. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.